Hey everyone, welcome to Brain Amigo. We believe that our brain functions based on logic and reasonability. But the truth is that our brains are actually sneaky organs and make us do some really dumb things. These psychological facts might make you feel stupid at first, but by the end of the video, you'll feel much smarter. So, let's start and talk about these mind-blowing psychological facts. Number 1. We believe things, even when we know they're wrong. Researchers in one science study fed volunteers false information, then a week later revealed that the facts weren't actually true, even though the volunteers now knew the truth. MRI scans showed that the majority of the volunteers still believe the misinformation. Number 2, we will find a problem even if there isn't any. Ever wonder why problems never seem to go away? It's not that the universe is creating problems, but your brain might be. In an experiment, researchers asked volunteers to pick out threatening-looking people from computer-generated images of faces. As the number of faces being shown to volunteers started decreasing, the faces that were previously mentioned as harmless started being labeled as threatening. This shows that we are wired to create problems even if there aren't any. Number 3, other people can convince us we are wrong, even when we are right. In a famous 1950s experiment known as the Asch Conformity Experiment, college students were asked to point out which of 3 lines was the same length as a fourth. When others who were part of the experiment choose an answer that was clearly wrong, the participants followed their lead and gave that same wrong answer. This is known as social influence, and we experience this every day of our lives. Number 4, we change the facts instead of changing our beliefs. Remember that story from Aesop's Fables? When the fox couldn't reach the grapes and convinced itself that the grapes are sour? That's called cognitive dissonance. When a fact or outcome counters with what we believe, we will change it in our minds to line it up with our beliefs to make us feel better. Number 5, power makes us care less about others. You've probably heard about the famous Stanford Prison Experiment. If not, here is a quick recap. College students were randomly assigned to be either a prisoner or guard in a fake prison, and the guards started physically harassing and beating the prisoners. It got so bad and violent that the 2-week experiment was canceled after just 6 days. Number 6, we are psychologically driven to break rules. Psychologists have studied a phenomenon called reactance. When a person is given a rule or restriction, there is a psychological perception that a certain set of his freedoms are being taken away. The brain reacts, and it wants to not only break that rule, but also others in an effort to regain its freedom. Number 7, the dumber we are, the smarter we feel. In the 1950s, 2 psychologists, David Dunning and Justin Kruger, ran a series of tests and demonstrated a cognitive bias, stating that people with low ability at a task overestimate their ability. This means that a person who barely knows anything about a task tends to feel that he is an expert at it. This makes that person feel more confident, and the scary part is that we usually tend to get convinced by this confidence and actually end up believing that the dumb person is actually an expert. Number 8, we believe only what we want to believe. Humans are victims of something called confirmation bias. It is a tendency to interpret facts in a way that confirms what we already believe. In fact, even in doubt and when looking for proof, we will subconsciously look for proof that will confirm our belief and not the other way around. It's one of the psychology facts that you'll just have to accept that you can't change. Number 9. Our brains want us to be as lazy as possible. Evolutionarily speaking, conserving energy is a good thing. When food was scarce, our ancestors still had to be ready for anything. Unfortunately, even though we have evolved and life is much easier than it was during the caveman era, our brains still want us to be lazy and conserve as much energy as possible. A small study found that when walking on a treadmill, volunteers would automatically adjust their gait to burn fewer calories, even though the whole point of walking on the treadmill was to burn calories. Number 10. If we have a plan B, our plan A is less likely to work. In a series of experiments from the University of Pennsylvania, researchers found that when volunteers thought about a backup plan before starting a task, they did worse than those who hadn't thought about a plan B. What's more, when they realized they had options, their motivation for succeeding the first time around actually dropped. Number 11. Our favorite subject is ourselves. Don't blame your self-absorbed friend for constantly talking about himself. It's just the way his brain is wired. The reward centers of our brains light up more when we're talking about ourselves than when we're talking about other people. Now you know why social media platforms have so many users posting selfies and pictures of every meal they are eating on a daily basis. Number 12. We remember negative things 5 times more than positive things. Our brains have something called a negativity bias that makes us remember bad news more than good, which is why you quickly forget that your coworker complimented you today in the morning. But keep remembering the fact that some stranger spilled his coffee on your shoe the other day. In order to feel balanced, we need at least a 5-to-1 ratio of good to bad things in our lives. Number 13. Food tastes better when someone else makes it. Ever wonder why that sandwich from that restaurant near your workplace tastes better than the ones you make at home, even if you use the same ingredients? One study published in the Journal of Science found that when you make yourself a meal, you're around it so long that it feels less exciting by the time you actually start eating, and that, subsequently, decreases your enjoyment. So even if you have made better tasting food than that restaurant, your mind will trick you into believing otherwise. Number 14. We are ready to sacrifice our morals when an authority tells us to. In the 1960s, Yale psychologist Stanley Milgram infamously conducted an experiment. Volunteers were told to ask a learner who was secretly part of the experiment a series of questions. If the learner got an answer wrong, the volunteer was told to press a button, which would make it look as if the learner is getting an electric shock. To no surprise, the participants continued delivering shocks, even when the learner screamed in pain. Number 15. We're convinced that the future is bright. According to research, most of us have an optimism bias that convinces us the future will be better than the present. We assume all our problems will get solved eventually, which might not be realistic for everyone, but there's no harm in dreaming. Hope you enjoyed this video. Give us a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe because we have lots more awesome content coming up.